As a luxury drama storyteller, I would frame this as elegance wrapped around betrayal. A private gallery, $18,000 flowers, vintage champagne, and a husband planning a launch party for another woman while his pregnant wife searches for an anniversary booking. But the true twist is not the affair. It is that the glamorous event he built to impress his mistress stands inside a world financed by the woman he thought he had quietly diminished.
She found it, by accident, a calendar notification on her husband's tablet. The title was Cora's Debut. It included a catering menu filled with shellfish he knew she was deathly allergic to. She was 7 months pregnant, standing barefoot in their penthouse kitchen, a hand on her back, the other on a glass of water. She'd picked up the tablet to confirm their anniversary reservation. This wasn't it. In 5 minutes, she saw a year of meticulous planning, inside jokes, and bookings for restaurants he'd always told her were full. Then, the final note to the event planner. A 30-year-old launches her agency only once. She deserves it all. He wrote that about another woman while his pregnant wife was in the next room. Then she saw it. A detail that changed everything. Something Julian, her real estate mogul husband, didn't know. The exclusive Astor Gallery for the party, the one with 60 guests and $20,000 floral arrangements, was underwritten by her family's foundation. She didn't call the gallery. She chose a dress and decided to attend. This is a story of a woman who spent a decade making herself smaller, and one night, that changed her life. The lesson is simple. The person nobody expects is often the one holding all the cards. This is about quiet power, dignity, and a woman claiming her space. Whatever you are carrying, let this story be a reminder of your own hidden strength. If this connects with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below and tell us, when did someone who was supposed to see you look right past you? We read every single comment. And if this is your first time here, please subscribe. We share a new story every week, and you won't want to miss what comes next. It started with a notification. Not a fight, not a strange text message, not the scent of another perfume, or a charge for a hotel she hadn't visited. It was a simple alert on a tablet left on the Marble Island. The event was Cora's Debut. The agenda had 32 items. Amelia recognized 4 of them. They were all foods Julian knew could put her in the hospital. It was a Tuesday afternoon near the end of August. Amelia was well into her 3rd trimester. She stood by the island, barefoot, one hand supporting her back, the other holding a water glass. The sun streamed through the panoramic windows with a brightness that once felt hopeful. Now it just felt like an interrogation light, exposing everything. She had only meant to look for their anniversary dinner plans. She was mistaken. The device was already unlocked. Julian never bothered with passcodes at home. She used to think it was a sign of complete trust. She now understood it was pure arrogance, the self-assurance of a man who never imagined his wife would ever look. The first thing she noticed was not the full plan. It was one comment in the notes. Can't wait for Friday. Amelia set the tablet down. She picked up her water. She drank the whole glass. Then she picked the tablet up again. 3 times, down, up, down, up. One more time. Amelia, stop. Amelia, you have to see. She opened the detailed event file. The recipient was a well-known event coordinator. The notes documented over a year of planning. She knew because she scrolled and kept scrolling. She stood there for 9 minutes and took in the entire architecture of a separate life, a life her husband was building right beside their own. The notes were businesslike. That somehow felt worse. They were methodical. They included private nicknames, photos from his work trips, and plans for that party at a gallery Amelia had suggested and Julian had claimed was booked for years. She read without taking a breath. She read without blinking her eyes. Then near the top, the latest note. Julian, the Astor Gallery is confirmed. Private event, Friday, 60 guests. They are sourcing the rare champagne and the full chef's tasting menu. Planner, This is incredible. You didn't need to do all this. Julian, you only get one launch. Cora deserves the world. Amelia looked down at her own stomach. She thought, I am 7 months pregnant with our child, and you are financing a launch party for another woman. The tears didn't come. They would show up later. Instead, her mind went, as she'd later tell Maya, completely silent and incredibly sharp all at once. Like a supercomputer, running a program it was never meant to run. She didn't take a screenshot of anything. She didn't reread a single word. She placed the tablet back exactly how she found it, screen off, same spot on the island. Then she went to the fridge for the snack she'd planned to have. She opened a jar of olives. She ate them with her fingers, standing right there. She looked out at the Chicago skyline, the skyline Julian loved, from the penthouse her inheritance had provided the down payment for. That thought was new. She rarely allowed herself to frame their life in terms of her family's money. She was raised not to. Her father, Marcus, had strict ideas about carrying wealth with humility. The most powerful thing you own, he would say, is your integrity. Her integrity was currently eating olives barefoot and considering the complete destruction of her marriage. She didn't text a single person. She didn't call a single person. She finished her olives. She rinsed the small bowl and placed it in the dishwasher. Because that's what you do when your entire world begins to fracture. You rinse the bowl, you put it away, you breathe. When Julian came home at 7:30, ready for dinner, tie loosened, she had his favorite cocktail waiting and was at the table with her own tablet. She glanced up. Made you a drink, she said. He took the glass. He said absolutely nothing about Friday. He kissed the top of her head, the kind of kiss you give someone you have stopped truly seeing, both affectionate and completely empty. Then he was gone. Amelia closed her tablet. She sat in the silence for a minute. The apartment hummed with the sound of the air conditioning and a distant ambulance. She focused on the noises. She let them be normal. Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. It rang twice. A familiar voice answered. Amelia, you're calling late. David, she said, I need you to send me our prenuptial agreement, and I also need the summary for the Thorn Foundation's most recent investments. There was a short silence. May I ask what this is regarding? He asked. Not just yet, she replied, but you will know soon. She ended the call. She laid a hand on her stomach. The baby was awake, moving, making small kicks Amelia had come to think of as little knocks, as if her daughter already knew she needed to announce her arrival. I see you, Amelia whispered, not aloud, but in the part of her mind where thoughts are born. No matter what else happens, I see you. The city lights still filled the window. They still felt too bright, but something in the room had shifted. It felt, impossibly, like a starting line instead of a finish line. She couldn't name it. She could only feel it. The distinct calm of a woman who just found the solid ground beneath her feet and realized it had been hers all along. She hadn't been totally honest with Julian when they married. She had her reasons, or so she told herself. But in that kitchen, with a clean bowl in the dishwasher, and a secret big enough to reshape a fortune, she started to see things clearly. The truth she had kept hidden to protect her heart was now going to be the very thing that saved it. Maya Singh had known Amelia Thorne since they were 19 at Northwestern. That was 11 years ago. In that time, Maya knew two things for certain about her best friend. 1, Amelia never cried where anyone could see her. 2, when Amelia called at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning and said, "Can I come by?" something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Maya had the expensive tea steeping when Amelia's car pulled into the driveway. Not the stuff in bags, the loose leaf she saved for real emergencies, the kind that needed a long conversation. Amelia came in through the side door. She was wearing last night's sweatpants. Her hair was in a loose bun. She was 7 months pregnant and moved with the slow, careful walk of someone who had just made a terrible, unavoidable choice. She sat down at Maya's kitchen table. She explained the tablet, the calendar alert, the party plans, and the gallery. Maya listened with that fierce stillness that meant she was actively preventing herself from shouting. Her knuckles were white around her teacup. She hadn't taken a drink. She was concentrating with the kind of seriousness that major crises demanded. When Amelia finished, Maya finally spoke. "Okay, right. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Amelia said. "You are not fine." "No," Amelia admitted, "but I'm functional. And that's what I need to be right now." She wanted to add, "I suspected something was wrong. Not this, not specifically, but deep down she knew. She'd blamed it on hormones, on stress, on the fact that Julian was always brilliant but remote, and she had chosen him anyway. I was aware. I just refused to be the kind of wife who acknowledges it." What Maya knew of Amelia's finances was just enough to sense a different background. There was a family home on Lake Geneva. Amelia's father, Marcus Thorne, had been what Maya called a Chicago business legend. Amelia drove a sensible SUV. She wore normal clothing brands. She ran a small art advisory service, not out of necessity, but from a true passion. That was a quiet kind of fortune, the type that doesn't seek attention. What Maya did not know was its actual scale. The reason David Cole, a man with multiple degrees who managed a global fund, took Amelia's calls before the market even opened. What Amelia didn't bring up at Maya's kitchen table was that Thorne Industries was valued at around $5.1 billion, and that her own trust controlled 42% of it. Julian had his company's junior counsel review their prenup, a document he clearly never understood. She held her tongue, recalling her mother's most important rule about wealth. You never use it as a weapon unless the battle is brought to you. Julian had just declared war. Elena asked her lawyer how long. The affair had been going on for over a year. The math was simple. A year ago, they were in Italy for their anniversary. She remembered the Tuscan sun and the small, hand-painted dish he bought her from a street vendor. That dish was on her nightstand. She told Arthur she found out she was pregnant 11 months ago, so he was already with the other woman. Yes. When I told him I was pregnant, he was already with her. He held me, Elena recalled. He swore we were a team and that he was the luckiest man in the world. All lies. The silence in her office was deafening. The gentle hum of her computer was the only sound on a morning that felt anything but ordinary. For years, she had dismissed the warning signs, the small slights, the condescending remarks. She wrote them all off as part of Julian's intense ambition. She recalled how he called her art consultancy, her little hobby, how he'd correct her in front of friends, the jokes about her simple tastes, his constant surprise when she knew something he didn't. "I assumed he thought I was just being humble," she admitted. "No, he just assumed you had nothing to be proud of." The distinction was brutal. He never suspected she was hiding anything, because he believed there was nothing important to hide. After a pause, Arthur asked the question she was dreading. "What is your plan?" Elena stared out at the Seattle rain for a long moment. "I'm attending his launch party," she finally said. Arthur was clearly surprised. On Saturday, she continued, "At the Sky Lounge for his new app with his associate, Sasha. Julian is completely unaware that I know," she said. "I will maintain that illusion for another week." "Why?" Elena picked up her teacup. The drink was cold, but she drank it. "Because some things," she said, "require a live audience." She knew what she would wear, the emerald green dress, the one her mother called an investment, a dress that cost more than Julian's first business loan. The drive home across the floating bridge took 25 minutes. During the drive, she allowed herself to remember. She thought of introducing Julian to her family at their estate on the Sound. The guest house alone was larger than any home Julian had known. Her mother had served lemonade. She had been perfectly charming, asking Julian about his goals and his software. Later, when Julian took a call, her mother turned to Elena and stated, "He doesn't have a clue, does he?" It was not a question. "No," Elena admitted. "When will you tell him?" "When I am certain he loves me, not my inheritance." Her mother's stare was intense. "That isn't caution, my dear," she said finally. "That is fear. You are smarter than that." "Yes," Elena had said. "I know." She had planned to tell him after the first year, after she was sure. But 1 year slipped into the next, and then came the wedding. The prenup Arthur had constructed was so solid, she barely read it. The secret had become the foundation of her marriage. It was a wall she couldn't remove without the whole structure collapsing. She had never lied to Julian. She had simply edited the truth. For 3 years, she'd wondered if that was wrong. The men who knew about the money were always different. They viewed her as an opportunity, a solution. Julian had seen her as a person. She needed that validation, to be a person before she was a portfolio. But now she wondered if she'd just propped up a man who thought he was better than her. She pulled into the driveway of their modern home and sat for 5 minutes. The garage was open, revealing Julian's expensive cycling gear and shelves from the remodel they'd done, a remodel she had paid for. He had been in charge of the smart home technology. It felt like an equal partnership then. She went inside. Julian would be gone for hours. She went to her office, the room he affectionately called her hobby space, a term of dismissal disguised as endearment. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and video conferenced Arthur. His face appeared, his office high in the Columbia Center visible behind him. The room was a mix of old law books and new technology, much like the man himself. He was 62, but looked 50. He had been the Sterling family's lawyer for 30 years and had known her father well. He often looked at her with an expression that was a mixture of affection and concern, as if seeing a ghost. "Tell me everything," he said. So she did. He listened without a single change in his expression. When she was finished, he asked, "How far along are you?" 31 weeks. "And the prenup?" "I need to know his legal standing." "In the case of a divorce, I know the case," Arthur interrupted. He pulled a thick file from his desk. "The short answer is, very little. Your grandfather was extremely thorough. The family trust is a separate property asset, completely shielded. The marital property, what you've acquired since the wedding, is divisible. But given the disparity in contributions, what exactly is marital property?" Elena asked. "The house, mostly. Some joint accounts. A car. The house is valued at what? About $4 million. You made the entire down payment and paid for the renovations from a private account." "So," Elena began. "So," Arthur concluded, "in a scenario where a judge is feeling generous, Julian might get $300,000 and his car." "And if he were aware of the foundation?" she asked. "He is not," Arthur said simply. "But what if, Elena?" Arthur's voice was low and firm. He signed a legally binding document that he chose not to properly examine. "Julian has no claim on the Sterling Foundation. The properties are untouchable. He is only entitled to a share of what you willingly co-mingled." She nodded. "Now," Arthur asked, "what is your next step?" "I need to wait until the launch party." "I intend to be at that party," she said. "He is celebrating his new venture with his mistress, while his pregnant wife is supposed to be at home. I will not let that narrative stand." A long silence followed as Arthur considered the implications. "Should I prepare for any legal trouble?" he asked. "No," she replied. "Nothing overt. I just want him to see me, to truly realize what he had and what he has lost." Arthur nodded. "Do you require any arrangements?" "Yes," she said. "Please compile all public records of my family's donations to the Seattle Modern Art Gallery. The press releases, the new wing dedication, all of it." "Why? He's going to search my name," Elena said. "I want him to find something." Then Arthur added a critical piece of information. In his typical dry manner, he said, "Elena, are you aware the Sterling Foundation is the primary benefactor for the gallery's West Wing, where the private suite for this launch is located?" She went still. Essentially, he added, Julian has rented a room in a building your family built. Technically, you could have his reservation canceled. Elena paused. I don't want to cancel it, she said. No, Arthur said with the barest hint of a smile. I didn't imagine you would. I want to be there, she reiterated. She spent the rest of the day planning, not grieving. Her grandfather always said to set the board before you make your move. On Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, Elena performed the role of the doting wife with an actor's precision, hitting every mark without a trace of genuine emotion. Julian came home at 8, had 2 bowls of the stew she made, complimented it, then asked about her day with a distracted air. She, in turn, asked specific, probing questions about his work, forcing him to feign engagement. At her 32-week checkup that Friday, Dr. Chen glided the cool wand over Maya's stomach. He looks perfect, she confirmed, her eyes on the screen. The baby's growth was on track. His heartbeat was strong. His position was textbook. Maya watched the rhythmic pulse on the monitor, feeling a strange new calm settle over her. She later told Ethan the good news, that their son was healthy. That's great, honey, he said, barely looking up from his laptop. She noticed he never used the name they'd picked out. Leo. He'd agreed on the name, then mentally filed it away like a completed task. She pushed the thought down. There were too many things to do. On Thursday, Ethan had a late work dinner and got home after midnight. He smelled of bourbon and some hip East Austin bar. She was already in bed and feigned sleep when he came in, a performance that now felt second nature. Once his breathing deepened, she stared into the darkness. The anger would surface later, she knew, like a gathering storm. For now, she let herself mourn the marriage she thought she had, and how she'd made herself smaller for something that wasn't love. It was management, not a partnership. After Ethan was asleep, Maya had to move. The house felt charged with her silent energy. She went downstairs and began cleaning, turning her helplessness into order. She wiped down every surface and rearranged the pantry shelves. At 7 months pregnant, she found herself scrubbing the tile grout in the mudroom with a toothbrush close to midnight. It was madness, but necessary. With nothing left to polish, she drew a hot bath, not for comfort, but to fill the emptiness. She sat on the edge, still dressed, her feet in the water. The hand-painted tiles were a deep cobalt blue, her choice. She'd driven to a small studio in San Antonio to pick them out. They were the precise shade she'd envisioned for their home. She thought with a sudden pang, I'm going to miss these floors. That was what finally broke her. Not the cheating, not the constant lies. That would all come. It was the tiles, chosen with such hope for a life she had built with a man she was supposed to trust. She wept for the tiles and what they represented. Her tears were silent, a discipline learned from years of boarding school. Then she dried her face and went back to bed. It was time to think about Sophie Hayes. Maya had found her through a single untraceable alert from their credit card account. A custom piece from a local jeweler. Sophie Hayes, a 26-year-old musician from Nashville, an indie artist Ethan's new fund was backing. That was the link. Her social media was a curated feed of artistic success, sold-out shows, a tight-knit band, a degree from Berkeley, a portrait of a life lived passionately. In every picture, she radiated an effortless cool. That's what hurt Maya the most. She had hoped for someone forgettable, an easy mistake, but Sophie seemed whole and vibrant, making it all so much worse. Perhaps Sophie had no idea about her, or maybe she knew and didn't care. Either way, Maya felt no comfort. She didn't hate Sophie. She hated Ethan for bringing this woman into her world. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. This isn't just a fling, it's a construction. Ethan built this. He funded her album. He planned their trips. He chose this path every single day. That isn't a mistake. It's a whole other life. On Thursday, Ethan was home and unusually attentive, a classic tell of his guilt. She saw the pattern clearly now. He refreshed her water. He asked about an article she'd mentioned days ago. He laid his phone screen down on the kitchen island, the telltale sign. "How are you feeling, really?" he asked. She looked at him over the countertop. "Honestly," she said, "I feel like I'm waiting for a building to fall down." He just nodded. He called it third trimester jitters. "Completely normal," she agreed, pushing food around her plate. "I guess so." Later, he mentioned an album launch party on Saturday. "It's for a new artist. You'd hate it. Just have Jenna over and relax." He didn't meet her eyes. The lies were so practiced now, so smooth. "Of course, have a great time," she said, her smile brittle. The relief on his face was instant. He had no idea. On Friday, she called her mother. Isabella heard the entire story without saying a word. When Maya finished, Isabella said, "I see. That's all?" Maya asked. "What else is there to say?" "I don't know." "Something." A pause. "Your father would be furious," Isabella said. "But he'd tell you anger is a tool. You must aim it." "Oh, I'm aiming," Maya replied. "I know. That's my girl." "So, are you going to that showcase Saturday?" "I need you there, Mom." Maya made it clear she was not to intervene. "I just need you in the city in case." The following quiet was filled with a mother's fierce, unspoken support. "Just tell me where," Isabella said, "and if I need to dress up." Saturday, 8:17 a.m. Maya put on a navy silk dress, the empire waist draped perfectly over her belly. Her friend Jenna had great style. She looked at her reflection, then texted Ethan, "It's a go." His response came immediately. "Car's on the way. See you there." He'd been her rock since grade school. "Your father would be so proud." She put her phone away. "Okay, little guy," she whispered. The warehouse venue in East Austin was just as trendy as Ethan had described. Exposed brick and warm lights. The Austin skyline twinkled through huge industrial windows. That perfect mix of gritty and chic. Small tables surrounded a performance stage. Bartenders poured craft cocktails at a long concrete bar. The air was thick with the scent of expensive sandalwood candles. A wall of vintage speakers was stacked by the entrance. An installation Maya, a former gallery curator, knew cost a fortune. About 60 guests were already there. Her widow wasn't on the main list. Ethan, a major investor in the record label, had gotten her a pass for a private jeweler's showcase in a connected gallery space. He had no idea. "Just act like you belong." In a way you do. Don't look for him. Or her. Get a drink. Find a good vantage point. Let him find you. She went to the bar. The bartender saw her belly and gave her a warm, knowing smile. "Just sparkling water, thanks," she said. He put it in a cocktail glass with a lime. She looked like she fit right in. She found a corner with a clear view of the stage and the main floor. She waited for just under 3 minutes. Then she saw Ethan. He was by the stage, deep in conversation with the lead guitarist. He was wearing a new suede jacket she'd never seen, one that wasn't in their closet. He looked completely at ease, happier than she'd seen him in years. He looked free, like he'd finally shed a heavy burden. And she knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that she was the burden. There it is. The truth I ignored. He isn't escaping pressure or work. He is escaping me. In his mind, I am the obligation. She is his escape. I am the project, and she is the passion. I unknowingly became his job. She watched him, for another moment, invisible in the crowd. Then Sophie appeared. She walked onto the stage in a simple black dress, and the air shifted. She smiled at her band. The entire room seemed to lean in her direction, the way a crowd does for a true star. Conversations faded. All eyes went to her. Ethan turned, and the look on his face, Maya seared it into her memory. It wasn't just attraction, it was recognition. The profound relief of a man who has found his way home. He looked at Sophie Hayes the way a person looks at their one and only destiny. Sophie was captivating. Maya registered it as a fact, The landscape now included this magnetic woman. The band started playing. He moved to the front of the stage, his hand resting on the edge. Maya's own hand flew to her belly. 7 months. The baby kicked. A sudden, sharp jab. A reminder. I am here. We are here. Don't forget. She wouldn't. It was Leo, Julian's partner, who noticed her first. She watched the gears turn in his head, confusion, a flash of recognition, and then the sheer terror of a man seeing a freight train approach a stalled car. He mumbled something to Julian and rushed over. Sophia, he started. His voice was tight, as if the words were ill-fitting. I didn't know you'd be here. Hello, Leo, she responded, her tone like chilled glass. It's a beautiful venue. It is, he sputtered. Sophia, maybe you should... Is there some other place I ought to be? She cut in. His mouth hung open. I suppose not, she said, taking a sip of her water. Leo retreated. Seconds later, he was whispering urgently to Julian. She observed Julian's expression change as he absorbed the news. She could practically see the frantic calculations starting behind his polite smile. Julian turned, their eyes locked. He froze. It was the unique paralysis of a man watching his carefully separated lives collide in public. His thoughts must have been a whirlwind. A mistake? A trap? How could she possibly know? He started walking toward her immediately. She had to grant him that. He didn't hesitate. She watched him compose his face as he came closer. When he arrived, his expression was a perfect imitation of pleasant shock. Sophia, he said, what a wonderful surprise. What brings you here? She held his gaze. I was in the area, she replied. This is a public awards dinner, Julian. Anyone can attend. Her gaze drifted across the ballroom. Quite the turnout. Whose project is being honored exactly? His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. She recognized that tiny movement. It was his tell before a well-crafted lie. A new associate, he said. It's for the firm, like I told you. You mentioned a charity gala, she corrected him gently. Right. So what's this new associate's name? The silence that followed was heavy. She had learned to use silence as a weapon. Julian, she said, her voice unshakable. Tell me the name of your associate. In the long 3 seconds that passed, she felt a strange, icy clarity. She wasn't devastated. She wasn't enraged. She was, for the first time in a long while, completely clear-headed. He gripped her arm, firmly, and guided her toward a secluded hallway. The charming facade had vanished. This was the real him, fearful, trapped, but underneath, there was a flicker of something that looked like relief. The reckoning had finally come. Let me explain, he started. No need, she stated. I already know. Sophia, I saw the blueprints in your study, Julian, she said. Last Tuesday, for the penthouse. The hallway was still. The sound of the dinner was a distant drone. I know about Audrey, she went on. I know it's been over a year. I know you're building her a custom penthouse overlooking the park. She paused. Our daughter is due in 8 weeks, Julian. You're building her a dream home while I've been at our house, carrying your child. He winced, the blood draining from his face. Sophia, I am so sorry. It's not that simple. I'm sure it's not, she replied. Life is complicated. That's a fact, not a justification. I love you, he begged. I really do. This was never... Don't, she stopped him. Her voice soft but firm. Please, just don't. He went silent. We will handle this, she said, but not here. My lawyer will be in touch with yours tomorrow. In the meantime, find another place to sleep. He could only stare. I'm going to find some coffee, she said. To Sophia. How? She looked at the man she once adored, at the designer watch she didn't recognize, the tailored suit she hadn't picked, his face a jumble of confusion. A man who never understood what he possessed. Because I'm not the one who has to leave, she said, returning to the ballroom. She poured another glass of sparkling water from a pitcher left on an empty table. She found an empty chair near the large windows, overlooking the Chicago skyline. She sat, 7 months pregnant, At an awards dinner, celebrating her own husband's mistress, she felt a disquieting peace, the kind of stillness that comes before an earthquake. This is the part of the story Sophia never told anyone for years. She had cried in the town car on the way there, not for Julian, not for his partners or Leo or the doorman who held her door. Alone in the back of the car for the short ride from her office to the hotel, she let the tears fall. She rested her head against the cool leather and wept without a sound, a technique learned in boarding school dorms, with walls like paper. Then the car door was opened, and she stopped crying. She was very good at stopping. It wasn't always a virtue. Julian never came to find her. She knew this because Leo did, finding her at the quiet table about 20 minutes after she had sat down. He approached her with the careful gait of someone disarming a live explosive. He sat down across from her, clutching a whiskey he clearly needed. "Sophia," he started, sounding like a man who had rehearsed a long speech but was now abandoning it. "I want you to know I had no clue about any of this until just recently." "But you did know," she completed his thought. A tense quiet filled the space between them. She watched him decide to be honest. "Yes," he admitted. "And you kept it from me?" "I did." She met his eyes. "Leo, I'm not angry with you. I understand the position you were in. I just need you to be aware that I know everything." He nodded in defeat, looking like a man who is grateful for being managed. "Is there anything I can do?" He trailed off. "No," she replied. "Enjoy the awards." He made his excuses. She sat by herself at the table for another half hour. Catherine was coming. A text confirmed she was leaving the symphony hall. Sophia waited with her water, the faint smell of lilies, the soft lighting, and the city lights below. Audrey saw her. Sophia didn't know it then. She heard about it much later. But as she sat there, Audrey Hale, 29, in a stunning gown on the night of her biggest career achievement, was starting to ask questions. She'd seen Julian's hasty exit. She'd seen the pregnant woman sitting alone, the one Leo, the firm's partner, had just spoken to with the posture of a man at confession. She found Leo. Leo, who was having the worst evening of his life, told her just enough. Not everything, but the most crucial parts. And Audrey spent the rest of her celebration looking like someone who had just found out her favorite storybook had a much darker, unwritten final chapter. I'm not certain how to feel about that. A small, petty part of me wished she was oblivious so I wouldn't have to deal with complicated emotions. That part almost feels sorry for her. Almost. I'm not there yet, but I'm close. Then Catherine arrived. Sophia's mother swept into the ballroom at 9:15. This was about 40 minutes later than planned, which meant she'd either stopped for a quick drink or to swap her earrings. Or both. Both were likely. Catherine at 62 was a woman who commanded a room without raising her voice. She simply became its focal point, so subtly you wouldn't notice until it was already done. She walked directly to Sophia's table. She sat. She studied her daughter's face. "Are you all right?" "No," Sophia confessed. It was the first time she had said the word aloud. Catherine laid her hand over Sophia's on the table. She didn't offer advice, easy solutions, or the scathing opinion she definitely had about Julian Vance's many failings. She was simply there. She just held her daughter's hand. She let the silence do its work. Sometimes that is the only real assistance. Sometimes it's the only genuine thing left. They remained that way for a long time. The event hummed around them. A speech was being given. Waiters passed with trays of tiny desserts. Someone raised the volume of the inoffensive jazz music. The city started to sparkle as the sky darkened to a deep navy. At 10:30, Sophia said, "I'm ready to go." "Of course," Catherine answered. "I just want to go home, get some rest, and deal with this tomorrow." "Yes," Catherine said softly. "That is exactly the right way." Sophia had her own driver take her home. She had already dismissed the car Leo had sent. She needed those 20 minutes of quiet. She needed the specific solitude of being driven through downtown at night, watching the world blur by as the radio played a station she hadn't chosen herself in years. She got home just before 11. The bedroom was impossible. She tried. She stood in the doorway, saw Julian's side of the bed, and walked away. She went into the nursery. This was the one room she had poured all her hope into. The walls were a gentle off-white that took 4 paint samples to get right. The crib was assembled and waiting. A small bookcase held the first few books she had chosen. The rocking chair sat in the corner where the morning light would fall perfectly. She sat down in the rocking chair. She placed her hands on her stomach. 3 in the morning. This was not the plan. I had a picture of how this was all meant to be. Not a fantasy picture, I'm not a fool, but a picture of something solid, something we were creating. The 3 of us in this room, learning how to be a family. That picture is gone now. Now I am just sitting here in the dark, trying to figure out what happens next. I made myself smaller for such a long time. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted him to love me for me. The terrible irony is that I hid so much of myself that the man he fell for was only a fraction of who I really am. He chose a woman who seemed to need him. I never needed him. I wanted him. There is a vast difference, and he never would have loved me if he had known the truth of that. I still don't regret it. I regret some of my choices, but I will never regret you. The baby stirred, a slow, gentle roll, not the sharp kick from earlier. It felt softer. In the quiet darkness of the nursery at 3 a.m., it almost felt like an answer. She craved solidarity. A quiet voice confirming, "I'm with you. We'll handle this." She remained there until dawn's first light touched the glass. Then she rose, made espresso, and drank it black. On Saturday, a message from Ethan appeared, sent from a downtown high-rise. "We need to talk. Clara, please." She glanced at it, set the phone down, and then snatched it back up. She typed a short reply. "Call Mr. Davies." She slid the phone into a drawer and turned to her gallery acquisition files. She had 19 of them. She meticulously straightened each one. It took her 35 minutes. She counted them like a rosary, the way her grandfather counted laps in his pool. It wasn't a prayer, but a way to focus, to find balance in a simple, orderly task. On Monday at 11 a.m., Marcus Davies contacted Ethan's attorney, a man named Ben Carter, competent but out of his league, and laid out the terms in a tone that suggested the matter was already closed. Clara was dissolving the marriage, their prenuptial agreement was non-negotiable, and the marital assets were considerably smaller than Ethan believed, as the majority were financed through discretionary grants from a private family trust. Moreover, should the divorce become contentious, sensitive documents detailing the Sterling Group's seed funding of Ethan's startup would become public record. Ben Carter called back in under an hour. Ethan had some inquiries, Marcus informed Clara by phone, mainly about Sterling Holdings. "And your response?" she asked. I reminded him it was a private family entity and suggested he should have reviewed his prenup with greater care. Clara paused. What was his reaction? His attorney stated, and I'm quoting here, "My client will need a day to process this." "He can have a day," Clara said, then disconnected. She sat at a sleek modern desk in her home office. The light from the bay felt different now than in July. It was paler, less intense. Summer was finally over. At 2:30 that afternoon, her phone rang. Blocked number. She almost let it go to voicemail. She had a silly aversion to blocked numbers. It made no sense, but 3 decades of living hadn't shaken it. She picked up. "Clara." The voice was hesitant, strained, like someone running on no sleep. This is Maya. I got your number from... It doesn't matter. I am so sorry. I can hang up." Clara was silent for a second. She could hear the unsteady sound of the other woman's breath. "Don't hang up," she finally said. A beat passed. "I just needed to say how deeply sorry I am," Maya said. "That's the only reason I'm calling. I know it changes nothing, but I had to tell you myself." "Okay," Clara said. Maya's voice was thin. "He swore it was over, that you two were separating amicably and just working out details. That was his story from the start." Her voice cracked. "And I bought it." Clara said nothing. "I know how pathetic that sounds," Maya continued, her words tight. "I realize that, but please believe me. I never would have. Not if I had any idea. If I had known about the baby." Her voice broke completely. "I am just so sorry. And the worst part is, I believe her. I hate that I do, because fury is easier, but I can tell a confession from a performance. This is a confession. She's not calling for absolution. She's calling because she's just discovered the man she thought was a rising star is the same one who lied to me so effortlessly. He fooled us both. That doesn't make us allies, but it makes us connected by his deceit." "Maya," Clara said, choosing her words carefully, "did Ethan ever talk about his financial situation with you, his company?" A short pause. "He talked about venture capital rounds, his new projects. He once said his wife's family was comfortable, that it helped them get the penthouse." Clara absorbed that. "Did he ever bring up the name Sterling Group?" "No," Maya said. "He kept you completely unaware." "Of what?" "It's nothing," Clara said. "It doesn't matter now, Maya. I appreciate your call. I really do." "Is there anything I can do?" Maya asked. "As a matter of fact," Clara said, thinking, "there might be." She called her sister, Jenna, immediately. She sat in her study before a wall of contemporary paintings. The afternoon light made the colors pop. Her grandfather had started this collection. He would sometimes spend an hour just looking at a single piece, the calmest she'd ever seen him. She relayed the entire conversation to Jenna. Jenna was silent for so long, Clara wondered if the call had dropped. "You're not going to let him get away with this, are you?" Jenna finally demanded. "No," Clara said. "I'm done letting things happen to me." "Good. What's your move?" "I'm going to ensure Ethan sees the complete and total scope of what he threw away," she said, "and the rest of Silicon Valley will see it too." She spoke the words into the quiet of her study. "You have to say it to make it real. I made my world smaller, to make his feel bigger. I'm done with being small." At 3 p.m. on Tuesday, Ethan came to the penthouse. He had called first. He had that small courtesy left. He wanted a private conversation. She agreed because she needed him to see it all, not for revenge, but for the devastating clarity of what he'd discarded. He looked terrible. A few days at a hotel, the confrontation with Maya and Marcus's phone call had clearly shattered his reality. He looked like a man whose code compiled with a fatal error every time. He sat at one end of the long dining table. She took the other. "Just tell me what you want," he said. The tone was new, a pleading she'd never heard before. It told her he'd already run the numbers and didn't like the sum. "Before we talk about terms," she said, "you have to understand something." "Fine." She took a breath. "When we started dating," she said, "I needed to know that someone could love me, for me, without the money. It was vital. My grandfather made sure I would never need to worry about money. That was never a concern, and I spent years hoping I'd find someone who loved me before they knew." Ethan was perfectly still. "You did," she said quietly. "For a while." "Clara, I'm speaking," she said, her voice sharp. He went quiet. "You did, and then you stopped seeing the person in front of you. I became part of the penthouse decor, and as I was becoming a ghost in my own home, you found a programmer who thought you were a god. I understand the appeal truly, but what you did, that expensive necklace, that weekend trip, while I was 7 months pregnant, that wasn't a mistake. It was a choice you kept making for a year." He had no defense. The man who always dismissed her as overly emotional was now silent. "I know," he choked out. "Do you know who owns the jewelry boutique where you bought that necklace?" she asked. He looked blank. "The one in Pacific Heights?" "I—" "No," he said. She told him. She watched his face contort as the truth settled in. This was the moment she had been working toward. Not to be cruel, but for him to understand the whole picture, the entire truth of the life he had considered merely a backdrop. His expression moved through a series of emotions she could not identify. She saw it finally click. The woman he'd treated as a side project was the primary investor in his entire life's work. "How much?" he started to ask. "It's not relevant," she said. "That's the entire point. The number doesn't matter. What matters is that I am a complete person, from a family with a life that is massive and complex. And I have been shrinking myself in my own life, scared of being seen as more than a tech CEO's wife. And I am so much more than that. I always was." In the end, he asked if they could fix it. She gave the question the 3 seconds it deserved. "No," she said. "I really don't think so." She was shocked at the lack of grief in her voice, only a cold, hard certainty. October arrived. Clara operated with the focus of someone who had shifted from mourning to rebuilding. She was finished with deconstruction. The deconstruction had already occurred in 1,000 silent, painful moments. This was a time for architecture. She started designing her new life with the precision she brought to her gallery, with patience, clarity, and a view to the future. The divorce, thanks to the airtight prenup, was finalized quickly. Ethan's lawyer came back within the day with a few counteroffers. Marcus rejected them with a politeness that was absolute. In the final settlement, Ethan's portion of the marriage was his sports car, his clothes, a few personal accounts, and a payout Clara's advisors deemed generous given the circumstances. He signed it all without protest. She suspected, and Jenna later confirmed, Jenna had her ways, that Ethan had talked to Maya. And Maya, after hearing the name Sterling Group, had looked it up. She had shown him the results, the financial news, the charitable foundation, the whole story. She thought about that moment for a second, then let it go. This was not a win. I have to be clear with myself. This is not victory. Victory would have been a happy, loving marriage. This is getting out alive. This is landing on my feet. And I am aware not every woman in this situation does. Some are completely destroyed. They don't have a support system. No Marcus Davies. No family money. No San Francisco penthouse. I think about them all the time. I'm not better than them. I just had a net to catch me. That's not strength. That's luck and legacy. I try to remember that. Ethan's things were moved out on a Friday. He arrived with a moving crew. She didn't stay to watch. She brewed tea and sat in her study with a catalog, listening to the sounds of drawers opening, footsteps echoing in the hall, and the front door swinging open and shut until there was nothing left but quiet. That evening, she purged the bedroom closet. It was 2 in the morning, 34 weeks along, and she worked by the glow of a single bedside lamp. Mark's half of the closet was a cavern. She studied the empty hangers and bare shelves, then began her work, methodically sliding her own clothes into his vacant territory. She transferred every garment, every box, every single hanger. She worked until his side and hers merged, until the closet was a singular space, entirely her own. She stood back and observed. For 3 years, she had lived her life in half of a closet she owned. She reclaimed the full width, like a vine stretching toward the light, finally outgrowing its restrictive pot. On Thursday, Mark's mother called. Brenda was 65. For 30 years, she had been a woman who saw her son's failings and loved him anyway. That was admirable. She occasionally wielded that love like a shield for him. That was less admirable. Claire had been waiting for this conversation. She was prepared. "Claire," Brenda said, her voice strained, as if a prepared speech had just crumbled. "I just wanted to say, I am aware of what he's done. Brenda said, I am not calling to make excuses for him. There are no excuses for this. I'm calling. And she hesitated, grasping for the right words, because that child is already a part of my heart. That little girl is my granddaughter, Mark. I'm begging you, Claire. Please let me be her grandmother. Claire was quiet for a moment. Brenda, she said, I would never have kept you from her. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. You wouldn't? Brenda asked, her voice thick with emotion. This baby is going to need everyone who loves her, Claire said simply. I'm not punishing you for what your son chose to do. Brenda's tone softened when she next spoke. The defensive wall had crumbled, leaving only a quiet regret. He was never worthy of you, you know, she said softly. I know, Claire replied, but he's a part of what gave me her. And for that, I can't hate it all. Sophia did something Claire never anticipated. In early October, she mailed a notarized letter to Claire's attorney. In it, she documented the entire timeline of her affair with Mark. She listed his specific lies, that their marriage was one of convenience, that a divorce was already in motion, that for all intents and purposes, he was a single man. It was unsolicited. The prenuptial agreement made it legally irrelevant. But it was the truth, and getting it on paper mattered. Why would she ever do that? Jenna asked over tea. Because I think she couldn't live inside the lie anymore, Claire answered. Even if she helped build it. She needed the truth to have an address. Do you feel sorry for her? Claire considered it. I feel like we were on parallel tracks of the same train wreck, she said. Like we were both cast in a play that neither of us had any part in writing. I deserved a better script, not because of my family's name or the trust fund, because of who I am. I deserved a partner who wanted to understand me, the art curator and the historian, not just the portfolio and the social connections that came with them. I'm going to teach my daughter to build her own foundation, so no man can ever convince her she's living in his house. Late October, 38 weeks pregnant, Dr. Evans glided the cold transducer across Claire's stomach. She smiled at the screen and said, Well, she seems ready to make her debut any day now. Claire drove home alone from the clinic. She had her people, Eleanor, Jenna, even David in his way. But she craved this drive, these 20 minutes alone with the Chicago skyline. She paused at a red light on Lakeshore Drive and finally put a name to the feeling that had been shadowing her for weeks. It wasn't just fear or fatigue or another shade of grief. It was profound relief, not happiness, not yet, but the kind of relief you feel when a compromised building is finally demolished and you see you're still standing safely on the other side. The foundation was sound. She was going to be fine. The light turned green. She went home. Grace Eleanor Hayes was born on November 3rd at 4:16 in the morning, following what Jenna would later describe as a truly spectacular and impressively loud 18-hour performance. The room smelled of antiseptic and fresh flowers. Eleanor had brought white lilies from her favorite florist, tied with a simple ribbon. Outside, the sky was a deep, starless black that comes just before the dawn. Eleanor had been in the waiting room since midnight. David Chen sent flowers, a classic white phalaenopsis, because he had impeccable taste and knew Claire loved them. The card was simple and direct. Welcome to the world, little Grace. Your seat on the board is waiting. Mark was not there. This was Claire's choice, delivered without anger or debate. When her labor began, she had texted him. I am at the hospital. The baby is coming. I will send you pictures. He replied immediately. Claire, please, let me come? She wrote back, not for this part. You will know her. She will have a father, but her birth belongs to me. He did not ask again. At 4:17, Dr. Evans laid Grace on Claire's chest. 7 pounds, 6 ounces, with a shock of dark hair and wide, alert eyes that seemed to be taking in the entire scene. Well, hello there, Claire whispered. Grace just stared right back at her. I thought I would feel 100 things in this moment. I thought there would be this tidal wave of love. But love is just a word until it becomes a person. And the reality is so much bigger than the word. I braced myself for fear. I prepared for sadness over the life I had so carefully planned. Mark there, the three of us, a perfect little family. I never expected this feeling. I never expected to feel complete, as if my entire life had been a winding path to this one single point. Not the marriage, not the gallery, not the career, or the penthouse overlooking the park. None of that was the destination. Just this. Her, this small person, right here. This is where I was going all along. She held her daughter tightly as the world moved around them. Nurses came and went. Dr. Evans quietly recorded notes and gave Claire a small, knowing look. The kind you get from someone who has witnessed this miracle 1,000 times, but understands that for the person in the bed, it is the only time that matters. Finally, Eleanor came in. Eleanor Hayes, a woman who never betrayed an emotion at a fundraiser or a funeral, stood in the doorway, looked at her daughter, holding her granddaughter, and began to cry. These were not polite, delicate tears, but deep, racking sobs that had clearly been held back for months, waiting for this moment of release. "She has your father's eyes," Eleanor said through her weeping. "I know," Claire whispered back. "He would have been so utterly—" "I know," Claire said again. They sat with that shared thought, feeling its impossible weight and its incredible lightness all at once. 1 week after Grace was born, Claire was home. She was at her kitchen island as the morning light poured in through the window above the sink. Same window, same light, same kitchen where, just 2 months before, she had found the falsified expense report on his desk, uncovering a lie that had cracked her world in two. She frothed milk for her latte with one hand. Grace was tucked into a carrier on her chest, a bit too small for it, technically. Dr. Evans had told her it was fine, sensing that Claire was not really asking for permission. Grace was sound asleep, her little mouth parted slightly. Her tiny fists were curled near her chin. Claire remembered that morning, the Amex statement, the line item for a client development dinner at Alenia, the shocking charge for 2 grand-tasting menus, the lie. She looked down at Grace. "We are going to be okay," she murmured. "More than okay. We are going to be absolutely everything." Grace didn't stir. The espresso machine hissed its completion. The light filled the space. Claire glanced at her phone, just for a second. A text from Jenna asking how they were. A missed call from her mother. An email from David with the subject, Q4, Acquisitions Update. She put the phone face down. She poured her latte. She drank it while it was still perfectly hot. She realized with a jolt that it was the first time in what felt like a decade that she had done that, just enjoyed a coffee while it was actually warm. It was such a small, insignificant thing, but it felt like a monumental victory. A month after Grace's birth, the feature in art form was published. It wasn't about Claire, not really. She hated the press. It was about a new youth arts center her firm had designed pro bono. The Hayes Foundation had provided all the funding. The first project of its new urban arts initiative. The article spanned 8 pages. It included a photo of Eleanor, Claire, and baby Grace, who at 4 weeks old, looked completely bored by the proceedings. The caption identified Claire as the new director of the Hayes Foundation, daughter of the late Robert Hayes, and the strategic mind behind its renewed philanthropic vision. She read the article sitting at her home office desk. Grace slept in a bassinet next to her. The afternoon sun was warm. She didn't feel victorious. She felt understood. She felt seen for who she was, not just for what she was connected to. This was her, not just a name on a building. Her. I spent the last 3 years as Mark's wife, and that was a part I played, a future I wanted, and a loss I had to grieve. But I was never just that. I was always Robert and Eleanor's daughter, Grace's mother, and a woman who knew her own worth, even when she let someone else try to set the price. That's finished now. The negotiations are over. Mark texted her the day the article came out. She saw his name pop up, took a deep breath, and opened it. I saw the piece. I never understood. I mean, I knew about the foundation, but I never grasped the scale of it. Claire, I am so deeply sorry. I know it changes nothing. I know those words are meaningless now, but I am. She read it through twice. Then she typed her reply. Just take care of yourself, Mark, and be a good father to her. She deserves to have a father she can count on. She pressed send. She put her phone away. She picked up her daughter. A new season had arrived. November. Grace was now 6 weeks old and had very definite opinions about everything. Clara was completely blindsided by one thing: his preferences. Oliver had strong feelings about the warmth of his milk, the texture of his swaddle, and the specific, off-key lullaby Clara sang during 2 a.m. feedings. At just 6 weeks, Oliver was already his own person, a truth more astounding to Clara than any 3-star Michelin review. She had crafted menus that won international acclaim and secured funding from investors who controlled fortunes. She had stood in the world's greatest kitchens, humbled by the art of creation. Nothing compared to watching her son develop a favorite blanket. They were in her San Francisco townhome for a family brunch. Not their old apartment, but this minimalist house Marcus had insisted on, which now felt foreign and cold. She decided in early September to make it her own, not by redecorating, but by simply filling it with her own presence and strength. Her mother, Eleanor, had been visiting for 3 days, already subtly reorganizing her spice rack with a system that was both an improvement and a judgment. Her sister Sophie and her husband David were there, their children immediately stress-testing the custom Italian sofa. Sophie offered a tired smile. Eleanor seemed secretly delighted by the noise. Marcus's mother, Victoria, came for a single course and left before dessert, as was her way. She tasted a bit of everything, held Oliver for a precise 10 minutes, and interrogated Clara about her little restaurant project, which was also her way. Chef Dubois, her mentor, had declined but sent a rare white truffle in a chilled box. This was Clara's new reality, a conscious choice. She had considered it from every angle, and the answer was always the same. She watched her own father, by the window, rocking Oliver and humming a forgotten folk song from his childhood. She had to accept that Marcus's failings were his to own. Her father's love for this baby was pure and belonged to Oliver, completely separate from Clara's own hurt. Clara was a chef. She knew how to compartmentalize. Sophie slid beside her, a glass of wine in her hand. "You know," she said, "you're holding it together remarkably well." "I have my moments," Clara confessed, "in the walk-in pantry and the master bathroom and the nursery at 3 in the morning. The family recipe. We build walls." Sophie smirked. Then she asked the question she'd been holding back. "Are you really okay?" Clara looked directly at her sister. She let the question land. She analyzed it with the brutal honesty she usually reserved for a new dish, searching for any imbalance before service. "I'm working on the recipe," she said. "It's not perfect yet. Some days I'm fine. Other days I feel the loss of the life I thought we were plating, the future I trusted." "That's allowed?" Sophie said. "Yes," Clara answered. "I know. I'm making room for it." After the brunch, once the children were napping, Eleanor and Victoria found a surprising piece at the bottom of a second bottle of very good Chardonnay. Clara took Oliver and went into Marcus's home study, the room she had avoided for months. It still carried the faint scent of his eau de cologne, a fragrance he had stopped wearing before he left, but which seemed to cling to the leather chair. She sat down, holding Oliver against her. She spoke in her mind, a thought so quiet it was barely a whisper. "The way you speak to your former self when you need her to hear something important. I found the spoiled ingredient, Dad. You always said every great dish has a potential flaw, a point where the presentation conflicts with the substance. I found it. I'm past it now. The scars are there, but I'm through. Oliver made a soft sound, the particular sigh he gave just before sleep took him, a sound of pure comfort and safety. I know what I saved from the fire. Not the bitterness, not the rage. I won't use those ingredients, not the maybes. What I saved is this. I know now that I deserve to be seen, that making my ambitions smaller wasn't being safe. It was fear dressed up as practicality. My partner, who should have championed my art, chose not to. That is a profound betrayal, and it is done. What I know now is that I am the kind of person who creates from scratch, and I will spend my life making sure he knows that he is too. Oliver was fast asleep. His weight on Clara's chest was a solid, warm comfort. The specific gravity of unconditional love, that's the real recipe. That's the entire menu. The way out was always there. I was just too busy trying to shrink myself to fit into his world to see it. She drafted a text message to Isabel. She didn't send it for a week. She composed it and reread it until she realized it wasn't about finding closure, for her or for Isabel. She rewrote the message to be what it truly was, a simple warning. To Isabel, he made fools of us both. You didn't know about me, and I didn't know about his lies. I hope your next love shows you off to the world, not just in private. You deserved the truth. So did I. We both still do. She sent it. The silence that followed was expected. By March, Oliver was 3 months old, a real person now, not just an infant. He had a rich, deep laugh and a skeptical expression for strangers, a look that was both wise and innocent. It was so much like Clara's own father that Eleanor teared up the first time she saw it. Clara returned to her restaurant plans, not full-time, but with the sharp focus of someone who works for the love of the art, not just to pay the bills. She finalized a bold new tasting menu, aiming for her 3rd star. It was a landmark concept, the kind of risk she lived for. She met with her primary investors in a stark boardroom on a Tuesday morning in January. The room had sweeping views of the bay and the kind of aggressive ambition she recognized from rooms where legacies are funded. She walked them through her menu, her history, and her vision. She spoke with the calm authority of a chef who had commanded the most demanding kitchens in the world for 15 years and knew her worth. When she finished, the lead investor stood and shook her hand. That was extraordinary, he said. Thank you, Clara said. She felt it. Not as a polite gesture, not the practiced humility she'd worn like a uniform for years. She meant it the way her mentor meant things, with honesty and precision. Thank you. Yes, it is. She got to her car and called Sophie. They funded the restaurant, her sister asked. I am utterly speechless, Sophie deadpanned. Completely floored. Stop it. I am going to be obnoxious about this forever. This requires maximum, sustained obnoxiousness. Clara laughed. A real, unrestrained laugh. The kind that isn't polite or measured for its effect. The kind that comes from a deep, true place and needs no reservation. She drove toward home. Oliver was with Eleanor, who was conducting what she called a palate assessment of the organic baby food Clara had bought. This meant that at least 6 new artisanal purees would be in the pantry by the time Clara got home. All from a small farm in Sonoma that Eleanor had single-handedly kept in business for the last 22 years. The January sunlight slanted through the windshield, a different quality of light from last August. It was different from the harsh, unforgiving glare of that morning 7 months ago when she'd stood in her kitchen with a cup of coffee she never touched, her world collapsing in the moments it took to open a small, misdelivered velvet box containing a bracelet engraved with another woman's name. This light was crisp, honest, the light of a season that knows what it is. It didn't feel harsh. It felt, Clara thought, like exactly what it was. Light. Just light. enough to see the path forward, enough to create by. She pulled into her driveway. She paused. Not the frozen, shattered pause of August. Not the paralysis of a woman who couldn't face her own home, just a quiet moment, the space between one course and the next. The moment before you push open the door and walk into the life you are actively plating. She thought of the woman in the kitchen 7 months ago, the woman in her robe with a cold cup of coffee and a tiny piece of jewelry and a secret that felt like a fatal flaw in her own heart. She thought about what that woman knew and what she had refused to taste. She thought about what she knew now. I am the one who creates the feast. I always was. I just let his limited palate dictate my menu. I am done with that. I am done being an appetizer. I am the main course now. Everything. The shares, the townhome, the broken promises, the heartache, the son, the mother, and the woman who agonized for an hour over the perfect shade of gray for the dining room walls. I am all of it, and I am going home. She walked in. She went inside. The lock clicked shut behind her. From the nursery, Clara heard her mother Eleanor's voice, humming a gentle tune that was pure, unconditional love. Her son, Julian, made a soft, happy gurgle in reply. Clara left her purse by the door. She walked toward the humming. Toward this new chapter. Julian would grow up knowing he was deeply loved, understanding the strength of his mother's family name. His life would be filled with soft blue walls, a vibrant painting, and a grandmother who sang to him of safety. He would grow to understand that his mother, faced with a terrible betrayal, made a powerful choice for their future. That choice was him. The heart of this tale was carefully shaped by our creators, crafted with purpose to convey a deep, emotional truth that lasts. We appreciate you tuning in.